Hey guys, it's been a bit delayed, but here's the final review for this year's Women's Prize long list on Happy by Nicola Barker, which won the Goldsmith Prize. My obsession with completing this project wouldn't let me rest until I made this video. Plus, Simon of Savage Reads sent me this copy from all the way across the sea, so the least I could do was review it. Truthfully, I don't have that much to say about this book, which says something in itself. This follows a woman named Mira A. who lives in a post-apocalyptic world. The book jacket's description, not mine. And this world is perfect because they've erased history, everybody's pumped with stabilizing chemicals, and their minds are all attached to this technological system called the graph that publicly records their thoughts and emotions. Mira A. opens the book by explaining all of this to you, but from the get-go you can sense that something is off with her, and the book is really about her becoming more and more unhinged as she inadvertently questions some of the foundations of this system. It's tongue-in-cheek in a lot of places. I appreciated Barker's smatterings of humor, like in this moment. The young never cry, never, because there is no need. Why would we? Why should we cry? It is so messy and self-defeating and so damp. It's quite subtle in places, like in this moment where Mira A gets into metaphorical territory. We must live within the graph. We must allow the graph to complete us, to satisfy us. We must not try and build elsewhere, because we are not architects. And the land is unsuitable. There will be insufficient drainage. Our tools will be faulty. Our contractors unreliable. Contractors, like that's just such a good detail. So as far as dystopian books go, and I think Barker's pretty clear about this being intended as a dystopia, it's on the lighter side and feels less like a philosophical treatise and more like frolicking into madness. One aspect that intrigued me was that the rhetoric of this new system adopts hodgepodge elements from various religions. I spotted Buddhist, Hindu, and Christian thought, and I'm sure there are others. And a lot of these philosophies are generally popular ideas, like that humans have become too tribal and have lost sight of our commonalities, that we should seek to transcend our suffering, that forgiveness is crucial to peace and happiness, that it's important to live in the moment, those sorts of things. And there's no one thought that's stupid, but when you toss them all together like a salad, it comes across as ridiculous. So it seems that Barker's commenting on the fact that the context of individual religions are important, and treating them buffet style can create contradictions and leach them of meaning to a certain extent. If you read this, I suggest keeping an eye on how little Mira A describes herself and her community in active terms. So here's the opening as an example. After they banded together and saved us from the floods and the fires and the plagues and the death cults, the altruistic powers actively discouraged the young from thinking about God. We walked a new path. They called it the new path. They called it a path of light, and the young were taught various simple techniques that allowed them to feel at peace. We moved beyond God. We were taught to celebrate this moment, and our chemicals were balanced. Of those sentences, the young are only active in two. We walked a new path, and we moved beyond God. Everything else is something that's done to them. Their decisions have been made for them, and the main goal of these decisions is to make these people so blissful that they no longer need to tell stories, which presents a fundamental question. Do stories come from a place of discontent? Even if something's a happy story, do you tell it partly to reshape it somehow? And going back to humor, there's a section where Mira A describes her perfect morning, and it's so trite and boring, and you can sense Barker in the background being like, this is what writing would be like in a world where everyone was happy. The impetus for Mira A's fall from grace, or her enlightenment, however you want to frame it, is that she becomes obsessed with narratives, particularly with the act of telling her own story, which is drug-like to her. And the novel makes the point over and over that stories can't exist in a perfectly well-ordered world, because, as another character says to Mira A, you are working in a world of coincidence, of chance. You are idly playing with random details. You are forcing things together. You are forging strange connections, and you are struggling to make a kind of sense out of them. Now, the novel handles this point in a heavy-handed manner, partly because of the setup. As you could tell from those sentences, the way these characters speak doesn't allow for much subtlety, but that made me think it would have been more effective to include at least some sections in third person, because It's quite an on-the-nose treatment of this theme of the unruliness and the necessity of narrative. The hook for a lot of readers will be the visual playfulness. I'll show you how varied the book is in that respect. It gets less and less traditional as it goes along, using different fonts, colors, blank spaces, symbols, diagrams. I think the most effective technique is that certain words show up as different colors on the graph because they're laden with emotion, which the system disapproves of. And it really makes you consider the underlying connotations of each of these words, which is a simple but pretty brilliant strategy. As things got stranger, I sometimes found these visual tics amusing and thought-provoking, but there was also a fair amount of variety for variety's sake. It was like Barker was experimenting with as many options as possible, with less and less care for what each choice actually represented. As you can probably tell, I think this novel is innovative and fun, so it's odd that I don't actually think it's very interesting, and I was trying to figure out where that dissonance came from. Eventually, I thought about The Giver by Lois Lowry, great book, go read it if you haven't, also about a supposed utopian society, and in her acceptance speech for the Newbery Medal, Lowry confirmed what you can clearly sense in the book, that as she created this society, she seduced herself into believing that it was wonderful, which is how she seduces readers alongside her, so that when the issues of this society are revealed, it feels like a betrayal and a loss. By contrast, Barker's not remotely committed to her ideal society. Her eyebrows cocked the entire time, and she intends for it to be extreme. As the reader, I couldn't articulate this for a little while, but I never became committed to this story because it's so clearly a thought experiment, and there's no real weight behind these questions because Barker knows the answers before she poses them. Narratives are necessary, and paradoxically, imperfections are what make something perfect. That's the point. There's nothing to challenge readers' views, and it can be frustrating to try to engage with something that's undermining itself. Like, why am I reading your book if the premise isn't even well thought out and doesn't take itself seriously? Basically, I would say this is innovative in style, but not in substance, which isn't to say that there's nothing worthwhile in here. Barker has some lovely turns of phrase. There's one where she describes the word enough as a curious sneeze of defiance. It's obvious that she has this whirring brain, and it's a fun read. It's an intellectual romp, but it's not too memorable beyond the fact of its weirdness, so I'm a little surprised that it's been honored like it has. This lighting is getting like very aquarium. There we go. No more individual reviews from me for a while, but you can find a playlist with all the Women's Prize brouhaha linked below. Thank you so much to those of you who have stuck with me and with this series, and I'll see you next week for some new content. Bye guys. Thanks for watching.